Can you see it all right?
Yeah, looks good. How about, okay, stop recording. All right, let's get going here. Thanks, folks, for joining, and welcome to our monthly webinar series for the National Park Service's Connected Conservation Initiative, which was formerly known as Scaling Up. My name is Brian Fainer, and I help support the effort. Our Connected Conservation webinars focus on how NPS staff and partners can use various tools and strategies to conserve NPS resources at the landscape and seascape level. As most of you know, we host a webinar at least once a month, and you can find recordings of past webinars on our internal Connected Conservation Toolkit, which is accessible to all DOI staff, as well as the Network for Landscape Conservation website. And I've posted both links in the chat box there, so folks can explore those two resources. We'll be posting this webinar following the presentation today. And throughout the presentation, feel free to plug in questions into the questions box. And following the presentation, we'll revisit those questions in the question box. And if there's time permitting, we'll open up the phone lines for folks to ask their questions that way as well. Today's presenter is Kelly Rourke, who serves as the Director of Programs for the Pollinator Partnership, which is based in San Francisco, California. Kelly manages the Pollinator Partnerships programs, including the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign, National Pollinator Week, the pollinator.org website, as well as P2, which is their Pollinator Partnership grants and scholarships. So with that, Kelly, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Brian. I first just want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today, and especially thank Brian and the National Park Service for hosting and coordinating. I really thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with y'all today. So thanks for the intro. Like Brian said, I'm Kelly Rourke, and I work for Pollinator Partnership. We are a North American-focused nonprofit organization that works to protect all pollinator species. And we do so through a lot of partnerships, through research, habitat restoration, and community organization and outreach as well. So pollinator.org is our website. I encourage you all to check out the resources and information we have there, many of which I'll talk about today as we discuss rights of way, roads, and pollinators. So with that, I will dive right in. So here's kind of just a quick outline of what we'll discuss today. We're going to go through some pollinator basics, some roadside and right-of-way management, best management practices. We'll look at some case studies and some success stories. And we will discuss some partnership opportunities as well for those that work for the Park Service and other collaborative opportunities for others outside of the service. And then we'll lastly discuss some resources that will aid in educating yourself, your staff members, your community members on the importance of protecting pollinators and managing for them on various landscapes. So meet the pollinators. This is a kind of a snapshot of the real diversity of pollinators that we at Pollinator Partnership work to protect. Most people are aware of monarch butterflies and honeybees, but there are tons of other pollinators out there that provide real valuable ecosystem services and help ensure our food supply as well. So many people don't know there are over 20,000 species of bees in the world. We've got about 4,000 here in North America, and this shows, you know, obviously the European honeybee on the left there in hive boxes and on the flower, and then on the right-hand side you'll see the diversity of native bees that all interact on managed and native landscapes. So unfortunately, you may have heard that pollinators are in decline. There isn't one identified reason why they're in decline. It really is a multifaceted issue. We kind of here at Pollinator Partnership have identified 4 P's that we discuss when we talk about pollinator decline. One of them is pasture, rather a loss of pasture, loss of habitat. This is due to many factors, some including monoculture, agriculture, urbanization or development, and urban sprawl. Another factor leading to pollinator decline are pressures of climate change. This is something that's beginning to be studied more. Some of you may have heard some studies looking at phenology of migratory species and mismatched bloom period between flower and when species emerge. This really especially affects native bee species and their life cycle as well. Another issue are parasites and pathogens. So this photo here on the bottom right on the honeybee is a picture of a varroa mite, the varroa destructor. This is a really, really nasty pest that is contributing to colony collapse disorder in honeybees. But there are also other diseases that can affect native bees, that can cross between managed and native bees and other pollinators as well, butterflies and so on. And the last P that we usually discuss is pesticides, and this is primarily pesticide misuse. So the prophylactic use, or using pesticides as a preventative measure, can be really dangerous. Treated seeds can cause issues and may not be as obvious of an issue as foliar spraying of pesticides. And this has really contributed to less diversity in farming and agriculture as well, causing more issues for pollinators. So animal pollination is obviously really critical to our food supply. So 90% of the world's flowering plants need animals, pollinators to reproduce. Seeds and berries and plant material are needed by wild pollinators, wild animals and insects, and they provide essential ecosystem services for humans. 87 of the top 128 global food crops are dependent on pollinators, animal pollination, and that is really equivalent to 1/3 of the food we eat as humans. So obviously very, very important. And it's really critical to note that these foods that are provided by pollinators tend to be the most nutritious ones. The fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts that we rely on for our nutrition, and not to mention it's a lot of those great foods that we like to indulge in, like chocolate and coffee. So really important to our food supply and diversity of our diet. So this is an overview here of some ecosystem services provided on natural landscapes. So we've got climate regulation, disturbance regulation. Pollinator activity can actually help combat disturbances like fire and hurricanes even. They help with water regulation and erosion control, nutrient cycling. This bottom right picture is of a native mining bee, and they actually aerate soil by nesting in the ground. They help with waste treatment, biological control. For example, syrphid flies, which are a really great pollinator of food, crops, and native plants. Their larvae actually serve as a pest control, a natural pest control in a lot of crop areas. The wild, diverse plants that they provide and help reproduce provide refuge for a lot of other wildlife. Some of the plants that they help produce provide raw materials, like timber. They help strengthen genetic resources and biodiversity. They also contribute to a lot of recreational areas, like at the National Park Service lands, for example. And they do have real strong cultural significance as well, historically, when looking at native cultures, and also cultural significance in modern society. Okay, so when we're looking at what habitat do bees need, I focused on bees here just to show a bit of a diversity and a comparison between honeybees, which are not native to the United States, to North America. They're actually from Europe. And they really need forage primarily, which is pollen and nectar throughout their flying season. They do overwinter and stay dormant during the winter, which will be seasonally dependent based on your region. And they also need safe food, which means pesticide-free food. So that's really what honeybees need. Native bees require a little bit more in terms of habitat needs. So they also need forage throughout their flying season and pesticide-free areas. They also need native plants. These native bees have more specialized diets than honeybees. Honeybees are generalists. So native plants are really important for native bees. They also need nesting sites. They need connectivity in their habitat. And they also need low competition when looking at foraging needs. So this is just an example of some different nesting requirements for native bees. I'm sure a lot of you have seen examples of bee hotels and different bee condos. It's also really important to leave open undisturbed soil. It's also really great to leave some dried brush and shrubbery that kind of the top left picture depicts. Native bees will nest in hollowed out stems. And also, you'll see top right, a feral honeybee hive. They can nest in tree cavities as well. So particularly when we're looking at forage, as I mentioned, native plants are very important for native bees. Non-native and non-invasive plants can be good as well when you have a little bit of more of a particular site or are challenged to find native plant material sources. Just ensuring that they are non-invasive is the most important thing here. You want to also provide continuous bloom. There are lots of different bee species and other pollinator species, as we've discussed, and they all are active at different times throughout the year. So providing continuous bloom is critical. Pollinators forage in patches. So having patches of the same flower makes it easy for them to get around and spend less energy foraging. We discussed eliminating or reducing insecticides in these forage areas. And also having a mix of woody, herbaceous, and grassy plants is really great for pollinators when foraging. Okay, so this I wanted to just stick in here after talking about native plants. These are great resources that we provide on pollinator.org. The web URL is right there. These are native planting guides, eco-regionally native planting guides. And we have all of these available on our website for download. We actually have a eco-regional zip code locator for the US and a postal code locator for Canada, where you can type in your postal code or zip code and get the guide for your eco-region. So these are based on the Bailey's eco-regions from the US Forest Service, and that's based on the native plant communities and soil types that were originally in those areas. So these are just a tremendous resource that I hope you all will check out. So pollinator-friendly plantings, obviously important as we discussed, but there's some more characteristics about these plants that make them really great for management as well. So they're native plants. Native plants tend to be drought tolerant. They help increase carbon sequestration. They prevent soil erosion. and they can influence crops in native environments for up to 2 miles. All of these together can provide economic benefits for individuals managing these types of landscapes, whether it's your home, back garden, a park, or you know, a right-of-way or a road management system. So actions to help bees and other pollinators. There's kind of threefold steps here. So preserve. Preserve what your landscape already has. That's the easiest thing we can do. Enhancing your landscape by creating forage and nesting areas and providing continuous bloom is essential. And then after that's done, maintaining landscapes in ways that help pollinators. Okay, so now we're going to get into managing roadsides and right-of-way for pollinators. So we have identified 6 best management practices that I'll go through now. There's a lot of information here, but it's all in technical guides on our website that you can find at pollinator.org, and that I'll bring back up at the end of this this presentation as well. But I'll go through kind of just the summaries for each of the best management practices. So here, the first one, BMP number 1, is to maintain existing pollinator habitat. So you want to identify locations or existing pollinator habitat, especially if there's rare or endangered or remnant populations on the landscape. You want to conduct vegetation inventories and integrate information using GPS and GIS. There's a lot of great tools out there now, phone applications, tablet applications that can aid in geolocating sites out in the field, which is great. Also using signage to inform maintenance crews and public of important pollinator habitat is essential. You'll see bottom left here, this is an example from the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative, and this is through the Ohio Department of Transportation. So, you know, there's even a phone number there for people to call and get more information if they see this sign, are concerned about something, or just interested to learn more on what's going on. So BMP number 2 is reduce mowing. Now there's a lot on this slide, but this is a really important one when considering best management practices for roadsides and right-of-way. So in all right-of-way, consider the frequency, timing, and techniques of mowing to benefit pollinators. You want to mow to maintain the clear zone just adjacent to the roadways. Reduce or eliminate routine mowing beyond the clear zone. Mowing once or twice a year can be sufficient and really help promote pollinator habitat. Seasonal mowing based on region should be practiced. So for example, in the Midwest, in Ohio where this picture was taken, mowing in late autumn after most pollinator species have already bloomed and gone to seed is a great time and a great plan for mowing. Again, regionally specific, so either you can do some research with your local groups, or we can help you determine what the best management would be there. So always try to leave an unmowed patch to serve as refuge for pollinators and other wildlife. Mowing at a height of 10 inches or more will allow plants to recover more quickly and provide more cover for wildlife. If mowing during spring, summer, and early autumn, it's great to mow during hot and sunny days when pollinators are more active and able to escape. So if conditions are quite cold, rainy, pollinators are going to be slow moving, may even stay in nests or on flowers, and are more likely to be caught in a mower or harmed that way. Another way to prevent this is to use a flushing bar when mowing, and this helps adult pollinators escape the mower blades. So a flushing bar is basically something that is placed on the tractor ahead of a mower and causes a bit of disturbance in the habitat so that pollinators can have basically a heads up that something's coming and get out of the way. CMP number 4, use native plants in right-of-way design and revegetation. So you'll see this is definitely a recurring theme for pollinator habitat and management, native plants. So, so benefits of doing this include reduced mowing and herbicides costs from established diverse communities that prevent erosion and weed encroachment. Native plants have deep root systems, which increase water filtration and reduce runoff, erosion, and water pollution. Native plant communities foster local identity and beautify landscapes. And native plants can support a lot more wildlife than non-native, hybrid, and exotic plant species. And also, native plants can be used in landscape elements like snow fences. So a lot of people have probably heard of, incorporating buffer strips or hedgerows in agricultural settings, but actually in roadside and right-of-way, you can also incorporate native trees, shrubs, and perennials that will serve as a snow fence to prevent drift. Continuing with CMP 4, here's just some advice on choosing plants, seed mixes, and native plant species for right-of-way design and revegetation. So you want to include at least 1 to 2 locally native milkweed species as a host plant for pollinators. So since monarch butterflies are migratory species, they obviously affect and are impacted by a large landscape, and a lot of which goes through rights-of-way and roadsides especially. So providing those host plants is really, really important. They also have a multi-generational migration over 3,000 miles to Mexico and back to Canada. So providing this along roadways serves as a great migratory corridor for them to ensure that multiple generations can reach their breeding or their overwintering grounds in Mexico and back. So it's also important to choose at least 3 flowering species for each season. So spring, summer, and fall. We discussed that a little bit already. And include many species of flowering plants as possible. Look to local plant communities to inform species selection, those of which we discussed on those eco-regional planting guides will be really helpful. Select a variety of bloom colors and shapes. So we discussed diversity of pollinators, and especially in native bees, and all of them will be drawn to different flower shapes, bloom colors, height, and of course times of year of bloom as well. Including native grasses and sedges can be really important as well. While not blooming and providing forage and food for pollinators, they provide a lot of nesting and other refugia for pollinators and other wildlife. So in ornamental plantings, if you're doing something maybe around a corporate facility or a welcome center, clumping plants of a single species together in patches increases aesthetic effect and facilitates pollinator foraging. Okay, so BMP number 5, training your staff and contractors. This is really important to ensure that information is carried on and remains in effect after just the initial gathering of information. So conducting workshops to train staff on pollinator and pollinator ecology, as well as the important role of right-of-ways, can play in butterfly and all pollinator conservation. Communicate the benefits of reduced mowing, integrated vegetation management, or IVM, and native plants to your staff. Train staff on native plant identification. This way they can better be informed to conduct those management techniques like integrated vegetation management, where we may need to target certain invasive species and in turn keep the native plants safe and present. You want to engage staff from all levels and departments on integrating these new best management practices into regular operations and conduct practical workshops on each best management practices. So it's really important to do things in the classroom where information can really be absorbed and you can gather a lot of people together, but it's really critical as well to get people out in the field and let them see these types of management techniques firsthand. Okay, number 6, raise public awareness. So one main component of this is outreach to local communities and whoever may be interacting with your landscape. So installing signage to indicate the presence of pollinator habitat and your commitment to the environment is really important. You can see the meadow restoration sign in Toronto, letting people know that area had been planted with native wildflowers and grasses, and to ask people to respect and be patient with the habitat as it grows. You can also organize a pollinator monitoring or tagging event on your right-of-way or roadside or park to engage local citizens and community groups. Citizen science is becoming a really big interest, and a lot of people are really motivated, and it's a great way to capitalize on what you're doing and be able to contribute to research and different educational programs as well. And providing all of this information on how you're supporting pollinators on your website, your social media, your email outreach is great, a public awareness for you, your group, and what you're doing, as well as motivating and educating others. So also with this, there's 2 more components that we'll discuss, monitoring and research. And I want to go over these in a few case studies that I think will give good examples of how these management techniques can contribute to research and sound science that can inform policy and more management techniques. So this first one is a case study at the New York Power Authority. So Pollinator Partnership worked with NYPA, New York Power Authority, who manages 1,200 miles of electrical transmission lines. They're the largest state-owned and right-of-way utility company in the U.S. And they have developed a GIS integrated vegetation management program that runs over a 4-year treatment cycle. So we're looking at different treatments like selective spraying. The 3rd year after treatment, right-of-way managers and technicians recorded vegetation inventories in real time on tablets in the field. So again, utilizing those technologies that are available for field data collection. In the 4th year, this data informs the herbicide treatments, which are selective and targeted. Only undesirable species are spot sprayed. So the results of this, over 14 years and 4 treatment cycles, they found an overall reduction in undesired species, as well as a lower herbicide application rate, which has created an open, early successional community where pollinators thrive and where electricity is safe and reliably transmitted. So I just wanted to mention also, when you're thinking about right-of-way and roadside management, another really important component of this that I haven't actually mentioned yet is safety and is reliably transmitting energy to those who need it. So luckily, a lot of these management techniques, which I'll discuss again, are all going to contribute to higher safety for management technicians and people actually conducting mowing and herbicide treatments and things like that. So it really is a win-win. So this next case study I wanted to go through is with Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E. This is a utility company in much of the West in California. So there's two different studies that we did, Pollinator Partnership did with PG&E. The first was on the American River Parkway, and this is in Sacramento, California. This study was the first long-term comparative monitoring field study in the West region that examined pollinator communities on actively managed utility rights-of-way. We did this by two different sampling techniques. So activity sampling is looking at visiting bees using standard visual observation protocols. You can also do this by doing passive sampling of resident bee populations using wood nests. So basically placing tube nests or wood that has drill holes in it, basically, for native bees to nest. You can look at the occupancy of those different nests to see if bees are utilizing these areas. Another study that we did with PG&E that's actually still ongoing is in Sonoma County of California. So we did this two different sites, the El Dorado National Forest and the Pepperwood Preserve. So this was a 3-year study to assess and compare pollinator communities associated with managed right-of-way that cross conservation lands. So we found, so basically right-of-way management and the removal of tall vegetation in preference of low-growing species results in more flowering plants and forage, which is great. So we really found with this and the previous study that right-of-ways can be really valuable habitat for pollinators. In this 3-year study, we found higher occurrence and abundance of pollinators on the managed right-of-way and adjacent open meadow when compared to adjacent closed canopy or forested areas, including the highest pollinator richness in right-of-way. So this bar graph on the right here, looking at pollinator visitation, shows you just a little idea of the analysis we did, looking at the unmanaged open meadow, the enclosed woodland, and the right-of-way. And you'll see that the right-of-way had the highest total pollinator visitation. We did include Apis mellifera, which is the European honeybee, non-native, and then a different complement of native bees as well. So in looking at bee diversity, we also saw that right-of-way was equally as represented as the unmanaged open meadow, but enclosed woodland, the adjacent forested area was always lower. And the photos here are just people out in the field doing monitoring and different data collection for these studies. All right, so this one may be a slightly off topic in terms of National Park Service lands, but I think is a really good comparison and case study for looking at the benefits of incorporating pollinator habitat. So this, you may have heard that pollinator and solar has become quite a hot topic. So because they've identified a lot of benefits to incorporating pollinator habitat under solar arrays. So there are environmental and agricultural benefits, and there are benefits to the solar developers. So first, the environmental and agricultural benefits: you get increased biodiversity, pollinators, and wildlife on your land. You get more stability on those lands as well. You can also host managed honeybees on your landscape, as well as livestock like goats and sheep for grazing. Pollination and pest control ecosystem services will be provided. If there is adjacent agricultural areas, maybe there will be spillover into those areas, and yields and production costs yields will go up, and production costs can go down. There's land revitalization. You can see that obviously in these two comparison photos. They'll provide carbon sequestration, as we've talked about, and then stormwater runoff and erosion reduction as well, as we discussed. So when looking at solar developers, there's a lot of benefits that you may not have thought of initially. So there's a reduction in some site prep and installation costs. There's a reduction in operations and management budgets, reduction in a need for dust suppression, so there's less dust with pollinator habitat, reduction in litigation vulnerability, reduced frost heave damage to the solar arrays, which can be an issue in some areas. There can be a decreased permitting time. There can be increased solar production from cooler air zones. So the pollinator habitat actually thermoregulates the ground and can help provide a more stable, cooler area, which will actually increase solar production. There's a reduction in environmental mitigation investments, and it's also, you know, a really innovative and responsible thing to do. And this just quickly is an example of, you know, the comparison of the root length and root depth from native grasses and forbs to turf grass. So it really gives you an idea of really the stability there. Okay, so those are the case studies I wanted to go through. Now I want to talk just briefly about partnerships and how the National Park Service may be able to engage with partners outside of the parks. And if you're not with NPS, there's obviously, you'll see a real diversity in stakeholders that should care and do care about pollinators. So this is just a list of some of the different stakeholders that are eager to support pollinators. So farmers, producers, ranchers, wineries, backyard gardeners and garden groups, energy, tech, and automotive companies, as we've looked at through our case studies, other NGOs like Pollinator Partnership, other environmental organizations, universities, engaging universities and graduate students, for example, to help with monitoring and research projects is great, and it's really a reciprocal benefit. There's a lot of international groups that are interested in pollinator work. Seed companies and nurseries, obviously, government agencies and policymakers, chemical companies, and many more. So I wanted to briefly just touch on National Pollinator Week, which is a great way to get engaged for pollinators. This is a national celebration you may have heard about. It is administered and coordinated by Pollinator Partnership. It is the third week in June each year, so this coming year in 2019, it'll be June 17th through the 23rd. We had over 200 events throughout the US and Canada last year, and it's been growing each year. So it's a really great way to get involved and get some recognition and engage with your community as well. Lastly, on this slide, I wanted to talk about the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign, which we call NAPC. So this is a collaborative. I have over 170 different partner organizations from all of these stakeholder groups that are brought together under Pollinator Partnerships Administration to work together in different task forces on different issues or concerns or ideas, innovative things that can help pollinators. And this is just a snapshot of some of those stakeholders that are at the table, all working together. Okay, quickly, I'll just go through the pollinator habitat development process. So when you're looking at doing a pollinator project, you're going to want to look at site selection, make sure to establish roles and responsibilities within your group, obviously planning, budget, timeline, site prep and planting, and maintenance as well. And then doing education, outreach, and certifications is a good component, and if you can, data collection as well, just strengthens your project. and can contribute to others. So for site selection, you really want to be realistic when you are looking at selecting a site for pollinator habitat installation. You want to think about invasive species, winter road salt, water access, adjacent lands, what might be going on in those lands nearby. If there's heavy recreational use, other wildlife that might be using the areas for benefit or to detriment, and environmental factors, of course. So this is just an example of a rubric that we use for looking at sites. It's a really good idea to have multiple options when looking at sites. This just gives you an idea of how we score and are able to compare sites really equally. And that other component I was discussing was the monitoring and data collection. So really anyone can contribute to science and to monitoring and data collection. So those scientific counts are preferred. Simple observations, such as notes on the number of floral visitors to a patch per 10 minutes, monitored uses of bee blocks, like I discussed in our PGE project, are absolutely acceptable and encouraged for data collection and monitoring. Looking at assessing the impacts of pollinator habitat, collection of plant-pollinator interaction data is all really valuable. And again, taking a citizen science approach can be a really easy and great way to get this done. Pollinator.org and E2 are here for help and advice as well. So lastly, going to go through just some of the resources quickly. So this is some of the monitoring and data collection tools that can be used. We have state-specific bee identification guides. There are our mobile apps for bee monitoring that have GIS and GPS locations in there. We also have pollinator land management resources. So we have all of these available on our website for download, some that focus particularly on monarchs, some for public lands, planting guides, as well as technical guides. This bottom right image is part of an infographic that we have in our technical manual for roadsides, and just shows all the different components of incorporating pollinator habitat at different levels. We have a lot of additional resources from Pollinator Partnership on pollinator.org. We have an app that helps you identify plant species for your area. We have a lot of different brochures, some about, encouraging people not to fear bees and not be scared of getting stung, to bumblebees, hummingbirds, all pollinators. We also have a pesticide applicator module that teaches those people about safe practices for pesticide application. This has a workbook, a video, and a PowerPoint that you can actually do a workshop with as well. There's tons of resources out there to help you either identify, enhance, or maintain pollinator habitat wherever you work, or recreational areas as well. So pollinator.org is a great resource for you. And with that, I thank you very much for listening. And I've got my contact info there if anyone has any follow-up questions later, or I believe, Brian, we might have some time now as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. Great presentation. All right, so it looks like we've got some questions here that folks have entered into their questions tab. And for the rest of you, feel free to add more. So first question, is it possible to make a copy of your PowerPoint available? Would that be possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I think it will be recorded and posted, right?
Yeah.
But I'm happy to provide it as a PDF as well, and we can link to it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. So we're recording this webinar, and we'll post that, again, to our internal toolkit and to the Network for Landscape Conservation website. But then we can also, at least for our internal toolkit, we can then post the PowerPoint there as well. Awesome, thank you, Kelly. How would you recommend making the case to right-of-way proponents that pollinator best management practices are in their best interest?
So I would, if you're working with a right-of-way company, whether it's a DOT or a utility company, I would first and foremost start out probably with budget and maintenance. I think that's a really good way to get their attention first and show those benefits. You know, letting them know that reduction in mowing and herbicide and all of those different maintenance costs can really be to their benefit. Also, a lot of these people are already doing this type of work. You know, under utility rights of way, you have to clear trees, you have to make a lower growing vegetation. So why not do that with pollinator habitat? It really can, you know, show you're a good land steward while just doing the things that they need to do already. So I think, you know, we went through a lot of the benefits on some of those slides, but I think starting with, you know, their operations and their management, how that's going to make things more simple for them while also being good land stewards, I think is a really good case to make.
Great. All right, here's another one. Are there concerns or studies being completed to understand better regarding increased pollinator collisions with vehicles and roadways?
Great question. Yes, there are. There are some being done. Most studies show that while mortality does occur, it's not a significant factor in overall pollinator mortality. So essentially what these studies have shown is that the positive benefits of creating this type of habitat along roadways really outweighs the cost, or the losses rather. There was one study done in Iowa that examined butterfly mortality in roadsides, and they did a comparison of a restored native prairie habitat and compared the mortality on that habitat to mortality on roadsides with non-native grasses. And they found that butterfly mortality was highest in non-native grassy areas and lower in the native prairie habitat. So even though there were significantly more butterflies in the native prairie habitat, there was a lower mortality. So I think that's a really good example of a study proving, you know, this is really worth it. And while some mortality does occur, it's definitely still a benefit. Pollinators tend to stay in the highly rich floral landscape and are less inclined to search for food elsewhere. So they really don't cross the roads that often, from what we can tell.
All right, kind of to piggyback onto that, is there any correlation with speed limit and butterfly or other pollinator fatalities?
That is a good question that I don't know the answer to. I have not seen any studies looking specifically at speed limits. There may be something out there, though. That's a good question.
Right. Okay. So looks like that's most of the questions that folks have entered. So I'm going to begin unmuting the phone lines here. And while I'm doing that, though, I've got a quick question to slip in here, Kelly. What about tourism bureaus and, you know, kind of, you know, for counties, states, or towns, you know, a lot of them have kind of like visitor centers. Do they get involved with kind of, supporting pollinator efforts along roadways and things like that? It seems like that would be a thing that could, you know, add to tourism and you know, attract people to the area.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Yes, they do. So we have worked on with a couple different departments of transportation on rest stops actually along major highways. And that's a great way to, you know, make a really nice and pretty and ornamental looking garden that, you know, you can even put interpretive signage at to let people know, you know, why pollinators are important and what's going on, what this habitat means. And even, you know, since it's a little bit removed from the roadway, can you know, help with those mortality issues we just discussed too. I'm not sure if anyone's heard about the Monarch Highway. So this is the I-35 highway that goes all the way from basically the Mexico border up through Minnesota. And this is a central flyway for the monarch migration. A lot of those, and there's, I believe, 6 different states that are a part of this pledge to increase habitat along this roadway. And they, I know, are getting involved in those tourism bureaus and the rest stops along the highways there as well to really use it as an educational resource as well as, you know.
Kelly, can you hear us? Oh, jeez. All right. Stand by, folks. All right, Kelly, you there?
I am.
All right. Well,
did you hear my answer?
I assume everyone. I can hear you fine. I assume everyone started listening to that music there. So I had to mute everyone again just to stop that music. But I'll try again to start unmuting some folks here. While I do that, Kelly, how about, what has been the receptivity of, you know, working with state DOTs, you know, and working to implement, you know, or supporting pollinator habitat along roadways? I mean, if for like from the Park Service perspective, obviously we want to have some of that pollinator habitat or restoration efforts take place near us. How do you suggest we could go about doing that? Because obviously they have minimal resources, financial means to do that.
Right. Well, I think to answer the first part of your question, the receptivity has been good, and it's gaining, I think. Basically, the DOTs, you're right, are definitely operating on a strict budget, but by showing the benefits in cost reduction of incorporating pollinator habitat is really the way to start and the way to get them engaged. But a lot of them, I mean, they have really strong integrated vegetation management programs and really educated workers in the field that are really capable of doing this type of work. And they're aware of that, and I think they really want to do it and want to be involved. We actually, 3 years ago, I believe, started a program, an award program actually, to identify either state DOTs or county level DOTs to award people for these organizations for doing great work for pollinators. So it's called the Roadside Management Award. This is through NAPC, the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign. And we basically, anyone is able to nominate one of these DOTs and, you know, tell the story of how they are promoting pollinators. And a review committee comes together and gives an award, and it's a great way to showcase what people are doing, you know, obviously honor them, but also encourage others to get on board and really start partnering with different groups like NPS or others.
Great. All right, I've got another question here. Have there been any studies on reproduction success on roadway rights-of-way?
Reproduction success. There may have been, but what we're really looking at in our studies are the forage trends basically, and the plant visitation. We haven't done, so actually the tube nest and the solitary block nest that we're looking at, that would be a good indicator of reproduction, but to my knowledge, I don't think we analyzed that in our PG&E study, though I think we could look at that. I think there's still pretty new. These are still pretty new research studies and research programs. That reproduction is usually something it's a little bit harder to look at and assess. So that usually comes a little later in pollinator studies once we've got a good baseline for other things like visitation and plant availability. Good question, though.
Okay. All right, and one more here that was typed in. Are there any grants available to help with these projects?
Good question. I know there are certain programs out there. I think it depends on, what organization you're with and the certain, requirements of the grant programs. But there are lots of pollinator grant programs out there for, either conservation, restoration, or just enhancement of pollinator habitat. There are some seed programs going on right now I'm aware of. There's a Seeds of Legacy program, which helps identify landowners and land managers to distribute pollinator seed to them. I think this is just happening in like the plains and the Midwest. So that's one to look into. I don't know of any more specifically for right-of-way or roadsides. I think the way that we usually are able to secure funding, and I think others to do research projects, is to partner directly with a corporation that's managing the land.
Okay. Are there others on the phone that have questions that they want to raise? All right, well, here's one more that was typed in. Yeah, so this is more of a statement. Why plant milkweed in road rights of way? I guess the part of the connection, the thinking there could be mortality to the caterpillars and things like that, or attracting monarchs to roads where they could get hit.
So again, I mean, good question. It can be an issue with mortality, especially for a larger insect like a butterfly. But if we're planting milkweed, not directly in the shoulder of the roadway, but a little bit in, where that would be beyond the clear zone of where mowing is really going to happen, it's not likely that they're going to be crossing roadways like that, especially if during their breeding, during oviposition. So, and the caterpillars, I don't think we would need to worry about. They're just there to basically eat the milkweed, so they're not going to be affected by the roadway at all. So I think just, again, roadways are a really nice long stretch of land that's already managed, that can really provide nice fueling zones, fueling stops for monarchs along their migration. I think it's a good idea.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kelly. I mean, was there someone with a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
I'm up in New York State, and I've been noticing over the last couple of years, we've got a lot of swallowwort that's been taking over a lot of the DOT right-of-ways and a lot of basically just anywhere. Is there a way that, or a method that we can use other than pesticides to combat some of these, wildly out of control invasives?
That's a good question. I'm not super familiar with swallowwort as I'm out here in California, but I mean, basically, and this is actually all in this this roadside management guide that I showed. It's actually for Ontario, but I think would probably be really applicable and comparable for New York State. If you're using an herbicide spray, using a backpack or belt applicator is definitely best, so you can really target the invasive species. Definitely taking into consideration weather conditions as well. You can also, if you're trying to do a mechanical or hand removal, Sometimes actually, and again, this is still using an herbicide, but spraying at the cusps and at the roots of where you're clearing can really help as well. But I'm not super familiar with the particular plant you're talking about, so.
Yeah, I think we might need to borrow some of your firefighting airplanes to drop pesticides on these things.
Oh, no.
Must be bad.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, well, thanks everyone. We've gone an hour now, and Kelly, thank you so much for presenting. It just seems obviously with, for the Park Service in particular, with all the power lines and roads and, crossings, and so there's the impact and opportunity within parks, but obviously, working with those partners to, look at connectivity for pollinators beyond parks. It's so much we can do with this. So thank you for highlighting this issue and opportunity, and awesome presentation. So thank you so much again, Kelly.
Of course. Thank you all very much. Great talking with you today.
Great. And folks, real quick, for next month, we actually have 2 and possibly 3 webinars for Connected Conservation planned. October 3, we've got BATS, kind of a collaborative model, Park Service presentation. It's a collaborative model for the Pacific West. That's a Park Service-led webinar. And then on October 17, we've got the Conservation Fund, who's going to be talking about mitigation solutions. So actually that presentation in particular, well, both of those presentations are nice complements to Kelly's presentation today. So look for emails on those 2 future presentations. All right. Thanks, everyone.